Morning all. Um, the objects of this lecture is really to give you a starter taster of the wreck diving course. We're going to take this through, stop it, and then carry on next week with the next part of this second set of lectures. Right, at the end of this lesson, you should understand the basic shot line safety, have a good idea of the use of the lines, and be aware of extra equipment needed for diving wrecks. You should also understand how how main features of the wreck site can give clues as to the location and navigation during the dive. You should have some basic safety information on what to do if you find yourselves trapped in a line, on a net, and have some knowledge of basic signals. Right, in the outline, we're going to cover shot line safety, phases of a wreck dive. Here we will look at the descent, shot and line, distance line use, and the ascent phase in more detail. We're also going to cover line laying techniques, safer wreck diving, equipment, using lines and signals. Right, let's look at shot line safety. To avoid loss on descent, a loss of a diver or divers on descent and ascent. Right, we've been taught earlier on and through the sports diver, if you've done the sports diver, what a shot line is for. It's there because it gives us a secure and short route from the surface to the dive site. This doesn't work if divers leave the line during the descent or lose contact with each other. Records will show that divers are at risk during this phase. Proper use of the shot line will always help to reduce this risk. And let's have a look at shot line etiquette. You know, using a shot line requires a number of tasks to be accomplished on a wreck dive. And it's made a lot easier if the whole lot is shared by the divers' pairs. This includes checking the shot when you get to the bottom is actually on the wreck. Deploying maybe a decompression station if one is being used. Laying and securing the bottom line, recovering that line after the end of the dive, and making sure the shot line is free to be recovered from the boat. There are many other tasks such as recording a plan of the site, making photographs of sections, or even measuring. It is easy to see how this could easily descend into a free-for-all where little is achieved. Splitting these tasks between the diver groups will also ease the pressure on different buddy pairs and make their dive a lot more enjoyable. Few safety rules. With a few simple rules, we can add safety to the way we use lines in the water, whether it be a shot line or a distance line on the wreck. Let's look at the priorities on a shot line as a way of adding safety. Right, divers Right, carrying on with shot line safety. Priorities on a shot line. Right, divers descending the line have priority. Descending divers should not, divers ascending the shot line have priority. Descending divers should not impede their progress and avoid making them lose contact with the line, as they are probably the ones at more risk at that stage of their dive. Descending divers should allow the ascending diver to pass upwards if they need to, but they should make sure they regain contact themselves with the line as quickly as possible to ensure their own safety. Right, check the ascending divers are okay. Check the ascending divers as they come up. Give them an okay signal. Get the okay signal back. Make sure that they're safe. It takes a few seconds, but could make a big difference to the safety if they have a problem or are short of gas. You've got to be prepared to abort your dive and assist if needed. If ascending divers need assistance, other divers should abort their dive and help them. Make sure the contact with the line is not lost, and whatever assistance you can give is rendered. This may involve trying to find the exact nature of their problem. At this stage of their dive, descending divers are probably in the best position to make a direct ascent to the surface and warn the surface boat of a problem down below. Now, there are also tasks that need to be looked at. Right? On a wreck, there's often other tasks to be carried out, and these are usually split up amongst the team. The following information is for illustration, and not all the tasks are appropriate on every wreck dive and should not form part of the course unless absolutely necessary. So we're saying if you need to do it, do it. If not, just keep it in mind. Safe descent with buddy. Although this is a headline as a task, there is it's more of a duty. It's very important that buddy pairs stay together during a descent. Positioning of strobe lights. If you're going down into a dark wreck or onto a dark wreck, we usually put a strobe light or a set of strobe lights on the shot line above the wreck, just above the wreck, so that it gives people the location of the shot line when they're returning from their dive. It's got to be a suitable height above the wreck. It's no good putting the strobe right at the bottom of the shot line if people are going to come off the wreck at a higher position. Checking the shot line position. You know, when you first go down, when the shot is dropped, it's not necessarily going to land straight on the wreck, or it may not land right alongside the wreck. So the first pair down will be checking to make sure the shot is near the wreck. If it's a little way off, they'll lay another line from the shot line to the wreck to guide people onto the wreck. This is called laying the first distance line. All right, so it's a line that they lay onto the wreck to enable other divers to be able to safely locate the wreck when they come down, and also to leave the wreck safely when they go down and join the shot line. Deco stations. Depending on the dive and depending on the depth and the duration, you may require a deco station to be put in place. Now, normally deco stations are located at the first deepest part of the ascent. So normally you would put the deco bottles around about 6 or 9 meters from the surface, so that people coming up have decompression or extra gas if they need it at that point in the dive. Right, the descent phase. Stay in contact with your buddy during the descent. It's very important that buddy pairs stay in contact, both with the shot line and with each other. They should not hang around on the surface. it prevents other divers from getting hold of the shot line. So when you go down, make sure you've prepared, you're together, and you give the correct signals for descent before you leave the surface. Avoid the term "see you at the wreck." All right, you must avoid leaving, going down willy-nilly, just dropping down and leaving your buddy behind. All right. If you lose contact or a free descent or a free descend to the wreck, you can do it if they've got amazing visibility, but normally around the UK the wrecks are not that visible from the surface. So you try to keep your buddy just above you and keep check that they're there every so often on the way down the line. Don't forget your bubble check at 6 meters. It's something we should all do, even when we're diving in Stony or Gildenberg or anywhere at all. You know, either you do a bubble check at 6 meters, or you do a bubble check as soon as you get to the bottom of the wreck. But it's best to do it at 6 meters, just a quick check around each other to make sure there's no bubbles and all the kit's in the right place, etc. Positioning of buddies on the shot line is also important. Remember that the guy going down in front is going down into the darkness. The guy behind him, every time he looks up, he'll see his buddy behind him, and he'll see the sky or the light of the surface above him. So going into the dark can be a little bit of a little bit, well, not particularly worrying, but it can be a little bit daunting. So it's always best to put the more experienced buddy as the first man down and let him lead the less experienced buddy down the line. And this is the idea of always keeping good contact. You know, remember that, you know, as you dive down that line, you're going to go down into the darker part of the dive. So, you know, you've got to think of the psychological effect that can have on you or your buddy. Remain in contact with your buddy. Again, we don't need to go too deep into that, but, you know, when you're going down, just give enough distance between you and your buddy so that your buddy, if he needs you or you need him, you haven't got to do a long haul up the line or a long drop down the line to offer assistance. And it also reassures both pairs that they're okay. And remember, you've got to keep signaling during the descent. You know, the descent could go from a few minutes, you know, it all depends on the depth. So just every now and again, just pause, give an okay, or let your buddy know how you are and if you're okay, or check that they're okay. You know, it adds to the joy of the dive once you get down there, if you both get down there and you've had no problems. Right, approaching the wreck. You know, slow down as you reach the wreck, right? You should be constantly aware that there may be nets above and night lines around the wreck, and especially if that's a new site. Buddy positioning one above the other during the shot line descent. The second diver on the line is in an ideal position to assist the first diver should a problem occur. Stay above the shot line or stay above the shot itself. The shot may be on the bottom. You may not want to go right to the bottom. All right, so stay above the shot. Watch your trim. Be very careful of your trim. A bad trim can ruin the dive, because if you hit the bottom and it's on the wreck and there's lots of silt, you'll silt up the area straight away. Right? which is not going to do you any good, and it's not going to do the divers following you a favour either. Okay. Mark the shot line position. This is where you might use your strobes. All right. So again, your strobes are above the highest level of the wreck so that they can be seen from the wreck by other divers coming back to the shot line. We use one strobe, two strobes, we can use a set of strobes, right? But this is all planned before we start the dive. We'll know whether we need strobes or whether we don't need strobes. It all depends if we're coming back to the shot line. If we're not going to come back to the shot line, we don't need strobes on the shot line. Fixing the strobes. Strobes normally come with like a clip that will clip securely on the rope and enable it to stay in one position so they won't move up and down. So what you've got to make sure is once you've put the strobe on, it's not going to slide up the line or down the line depending on tide or movement. All right, you want the strobe to stay exactly where you put it. Make sure the strobe is simple to use, and the hook is the clip-in device is simple to use, because the simple fact is you've got to take that off before you leave the shot line. So the last divers coming up will be required to remove the strobes. So they don't want to be hanging around for a long time trying to find a way of getting the strobes off the line. So make sure they're attached securely, but in a simple enough manner that they can be taken off whenever. Right, reaching the wreck. Right, you reach the wreck, secure the line. If you're the first down the line, it will be up to you to check the proximity of the line to the wreck. Does it need tying off or tying in? Will other divers come down the line, pull it out? Is it well positioned? A few moments spent doing this will ensure a safe return to the shot line and to the surface. Let's have a look. Check the shot line here. Primary tie off, high or low. If the shot line is below the high point of the wreck, you may have to tie it off up towards the top of the wreck, or you may need to come up a little bit and tie it so it is at the highest point. You want to avoid descent at the end of the dive, so you don't want people descending back down to the bottom of the shot line to join the shot line. You want them ascending level to the highest point of the dive so that they don't have to descend and put extra time on their decompression if they've got it. Yeah, so I think that's enough said about that one. Float line, float to keep the line tensioned. On some shots, you'll put a small float a little bit up so that the line will actually be tensioned between that float and the wreck, rather than it being dragged out with the current and sort of not having a vertical position. I've not seen very many of them, but they do. It is something that people use. Most of the shot lines that I've ever used have been tension shot lines that tension themselves automatically with a counterweight. So it all depends how the shot's been devised and what sort of shot you're using. Check your gases. Now, you might use more gas to go down than you anticipated, or you may have a problem. If you get down the bottom, always check your gas and your buddy's gas to make sure you have sufficient gas to complete your dive around the wreck. If your gas is low, either change your plan to accommodate that or abort the dive and go back up the line to the surface. Moving away from the shot line, we need to lay a line connecting the shot line to the site of the wreck. This will be used by other divers to enable them to follow safely onto the wreck. This will be covered a little bit later. Right, what you need to know really is avoid kicking up the sill. So movement on the wreck, right? The best way to move around the wreck. Avoid kicking up silt. So to avoid kicking up silt, you need to have good buoyancy and trim, right? Good buoyancy and trim. All wrecks, without fail, are covered in silt or contain areas of silt. So your buoyancy and trim should allow you to just be off enough distance between you and the surface of the wreck so that there is no chance of you kicking up or disturbing the silt that's laying around the wreck. There's various ways of doing that. You know, good buoyancy, you should be able to control that with your lung capacity and a little bit of adjustment to your dry suit or wing, depending which one you're using. Finning methods and movement techniques, right? You do not want to do long, deep, hard kicks down, right? What you want to do is you want to bend your legs at the knee, and so your fins are actually positioned higher than the rest of your body. And you could use a high frog kick. You can use a very gentle sculling. You can use a flutter kick, which means you're actually just moving your fins from the ankle very, very gently, but it will move you along the wreck very, very nicely, and it does not disturb any loose silt that's there. Failing that, you could use a finger walking, where you could just ease yourself over the wreck using your fingers to pull you along to the position that you want to be in, right? If you're going to use line, right, to move, remember that you're going to be multitasking. Right? You need to become second nature of how to lay line and how to retrieve line. But we'll do a practical session with that later in the course. This next slide covers safe return from the wreck. So you've done your dive, you're now on your way back, right? So you're returning to the shot line. When you return to the shot line, you stay together, right? You make sure your buddy and you are in close contact. When returning to the shot line, if you know you've got to get back to the shot line, give yourself time to allow yourself to be prepared and get yourself ready for the ascent on return. Don't turn up right at the last moment and go up the shot line in a rush, right? Make sure you're ready, everything's clipped off correctly, and you're both in the right, let's say, orientation to return to the shot line and return to the surface. Before you make your ascent, check your gases. Right, make sure you have sufficient gas to get you up to the surface, allowing for any deco stops that you may have to make. All right, if you're low on gas and you're not at the shot line, right, not at the shot line, don't try to get back to the shot line. If you're using a distance line, cut the distance line, stow the reel securely, and as a buddy pair, leave the wreck together. All right, and when you're clear of the wreck, put up a DSMB, right? One hold the DSMB, one hold the reel, put it up, and then come up that DSMB together. Using the DSMB, do an ascent. But you're going to use less gas, right? Because you'll come up to your shallowest point, all right, with your first safety stop, and you'll do your decompression there. You're going to use less gas to do that than trying to find the shot line again when you've got a little bit of a panic on. All right. Now, during the ascent, it's almost important, right, that you come up together. So you try to have each of you displaced on the line vertically as a buddy pair. Not one above the other, right? Because remember, you're both going to do decompression, roughly the same decompression time each. So you don't want one deeper than the other, requiring longer decompression. If you're diving on a computer, it will automatically account for one being deeper, one being shallower. So keep together. While you're going up, always use signals, right? You may be sat at 6 meters for 10 minutes. You don't know if that's your deco time. So during that 10 minutes, make sure your buddy's comfortable. Make sure you've both got sufficient gas, right? Keep in contact with each other, right? Decompression means quality, right? You've got to do this and you've got to do it properly. So if you've got to stop at 6 meters at a certain time, make sure you are at 6 meters at that specified time. And then you accurately time the decompression stop. Right? You need good buoyancy, you need good trim. But if you've got all of that, you're going to have an enjoyable dive and you're going to come back to the vessel or the boat, and you're going to be perfectly okay, ready to do the next dive. Right, these next slides coming up are going to just deal with the risks that you can have while wreck diving, or the hazards and risks that you've got while wreck diving. Silt. Silt will always be a problem on a wreck. Very, very few wrecks are silt-free. Even those that are poorly broken up, silt will still collect in the gullies and around superstructure or around plating, right? So silt will always be there, right? The last thing you want to do is stir up silt. It's going to ruin your dive, but it will also ruin the dive of the people following you onto the wreck. All right, so poor finning is possibly the #1 cause of silt disturbance. So watch how you fin. Make sure your feet are well clear of the seabed or the surface of the wreck. Poor buoyancy is another one, right? If you're dropping up and down, up and down, up and down, you are likely to disturb the silt. Your position in the water, your trim, will also add to a risk of silt disturbance. Bubbles. Bubbles tend to dislodge rust particles in overhead wreckage, and they can bring down a lot of rust particles, which will add to silt. They can also disturb silt if it's found above you, in the overhangs of a wreck. Tide. Tide will be of assistance to you, because if there's a tide running, the silt usually gets carried away. All right, but it may also make things worse, because if the tide's running against you, silt disturbed by other people will be pushed on to you at the position that you're diving. So tide will or can be a problem. Fragile structures, right? Metal rusts and it gets very thin over the years. And a lot of these wrecks have been down for many, many years. It can cause cuts, damage to yourself, damage to the equipment, and possible collapse. It may look like it's solid, but as soon as you touch it, that's all it needs for the weak part to give way and the whole lot to come down. So be very, very careful of fragile structures. Exhaust bubbles will hasten the process of deterioration. They, let's say, increase the rusting or the breakdown of the metal surface. So, keep remember, there's always going to be bubbles there, but try and keep your bubbles as less as you possibly can. Right? Another one, of course, is entrapment. Entrapment of yourself, like getting bits of your equipment caught on bits of the wreck. Right? So it's not uncommon for this to happen. And all of a sudden you're swimming along there and you find you're not going anywhere, and you find out that your reel or your DSMB has snagged the wreck behind you. Right, that has to be sorted out. So the best way is to make sure that there's nothing hanging off you in a position that could snag without you knowing it. One of the worst offenders is we hang our DSMBs, torches, bags, etc. off the belly part of our kit. So we're up there and our bags and all our bits and pieces are hanging down below us, right? If you're going to hang anything off, try to hang it behind you so that it sits on your arse rather than around your waist. Again, it's good technique to make sure you don't look like a Christmas tree when you hit the water. Hark at me telling you that when I look like a Christmas tree when I hit the water at times. But anyhow, self is a snagging hazard. Also, wrecks are a snagging hazard. There's bits of wreck sticking up all over the place. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't. If it's a new wreck, it may have a lot of wires, pipes, bits of rope, God knows what else hanging around all over the place, right? So you've got to be aware that they are snagging hazards, but they're snagging hazards to you if you get caught in them. Fishing nets are snagging hazards, right? So be very, very careful. Fishing line is snag. You know, a good wreck that is known to have lots of fish on it also attracts anglers. And they'll put their wreck in, their reels in and their lines, and they'll snag their lines and they'll just cut their lines and put a new hook on and go back in and do it again. So you've got a lot of filament line that could be hanging around the wreck that you will not see, but you'll soon find out it's there when you start getting snagged up on it. So be very, very careful of this aspect of wreck diving, right? Try to ensure it doesn't happen or you're aware of the risks before you go in the water. Right, further risk hazards. Overhanging structures. You know, be aware of the type of wreck you are diving and get as much information about it first. Don't dive in conditions that may put you in an overhead situation without you knowing, right? So be very careful you don't enter into a wreck by mistake because of poor visibility. Right. It's very easy to swim into a wreck just using the beam of your light as your guide. You don't see the overhead. You just think you're swimming in a darker part of the wreck. But if you look up, all of a sudden you find out you're inside the wreck and you never intended to be there. Right. Always be aware of an overhead environment. Right. So when you're swimming in an overhead environment, always be aware that that's where you are, in an overhead environment. And things hang off of the top of deck heads that like lights and pieces of wire and cabling, etc. They all come down after a time if the wreck went down in pristine condition. You know, if it hadn't been gutted before it was sunk, then all this lot will start to materialize as the interior of the wreck starts to decay and fall away, right? Remember, when you get into an overhead environment, it is not possible to make a direct ascent to the surface. You've got to get out before you can make that ascent. So never go into an overhead environment further than you can see the exit clearly, right? And always be aware of where the exit is at all times, because you've got to go through that exit to make an ascent to the surface. Be very, very aware of that. Right, sharp edges. You know, speaks for itself. You know, welded ships as opposed to riveted ships where each plate is riveted together. Welded ships are long pieces of steel joined together with welds. The welds give, the rust gets in, everything starts to break up, the metal starts to deteriorate and rust, and it leaves sharp edges. Sharp edges are a danger to you and your equipment. If you see sharp edges, one of the ways of protecting yourself against sharp edges is wear gloves. You know, if you've only got bare hands, be careful where you put your hands or what you grip, because it may cut you and cut you severely. So always wear gloves where you can. Some areas like the Red Sea, they don't let you wear gloves. But in the UK, you wear gloves as a matter of habit because of the temperatures. Right? Be careful of your equipment, hoses. You know, make sure they're well stowed and well protected. Because if your hose gets caught on a sharp edge, the next thing you know, you haven't got any air because you're going to sever that hose. So always be aware of your own equipment and you know that getting in contact with a sharp edge. Like expensive torches hanging from below you get caught on a sharp edge, and the next thing you know, you haven't got an expensive torch no more. Best protection, of course, is don't come into contact with sharp edges. Avoid sharp edges, and then you'll have no problem. Right, dark. Remember, you're going down into the depths. The light is going to be less, so therefore the environment's going to be dark. It will get darker where the structure of the wreck blocks the sunlight or blocks the light coming from the surface, right? So carry a torch. In fact, carry 2 torches and have 1 torch just in case the other torch don't work. All right, so always carry 2 torches. Remember, the darkness will also increase your breathing rate. You know, if you can see where you're going, you're relaxed. If you don't know exactly where you're going, you tend to get a little bit anxious, and therefore your breathing rate might go up. So in that case, keep a very, very careful check of your gas. And if you start to get low, make the plan before you're too low to deal with the emergency. All right. Wreck orientation. How did the wreck sink? Did it sink upright? Did it sink upside down? Did it sink on its side, vertically, horizontally, or what? You know, all wrecks do not sink as you would like them to sink, flat on the bottom, standing the right way up. Big battleships and battle cruisers with big guns always end up upside down. Most warships end up either on one side or the other side. It all depends how they sank, right? So know the wreck orientation before you go in the water. All right. So if it's on its side, remember that one side is going to be higher than the other side. All right. If the bow is deeper than the stern, start at the bow and then work your way back up to the stern. Right, you get a longer, better dive doing it that way. Navigation. Yeah, as I found out, compasses do not work very, very well on metal. I thought my one was super special, but I found out it's not. So if somebody says to you that the wreck is in a north-south orientation, right, get your north-south orientation sorted out before you start swimming along the wreck, right? But it's just an idea of knowing how the wreck is laying. But the best way, of course, is to study the wreck or ask questions about the wreck and find out where the key parts of the wreck are. So if the bow is deep and the stern is shallow, and in between that you've got the accommodation, engine rooms, etc. You know, as long as you know roughly what's going to be there. So if I pass a boiler on the way down or on the way up, I would expect to pass that boiler again when I'm on my way back to where I started. So pilotage comes in very, very much in wreck diving as to knowing where you are at all times. So that's about all you really need to know about navigation. Right, separation speaks for itself. Being separated from your buddy on any dive is a bad idea, and on a wreck it's even worse. All right, so keep good contact with your buddy all times. Good line technique will help both of you have a good dive and remain in contact. All right, so separation shouldn't happen if you plan the dive and if you dive sensibly. Marine life. Most wrecks are covered in corals or ferns or all sorts of marine life, and most wrecks house or accommodate a load of different species of fish, right? Be very careful. You know, we're diving in the UK, so we don't get sharks, we don't get some of the other nasties that we would get in tropical waters, but we do get a fella called a conger eel. And conger eels love wrecks. Right? And conger eels grow to some amazing sizes, and they're not very, very pleasantly mannered species of fish. So if you see a conger eel, don't think about putting your hand in there and giving it a stroke, because you may come out without a hand. Okay, so be aware of what's around you, marine life, etc., and respect it. Look at it, photograph it, but leave it alone. Right? You're a visitor on its property, so treat it with respect. Munitions and explosives. You might dive some old military wrecks, naval wrecks, etc. They might be World War II, they might be World War I. They might be cargo ships that were carrying munitions to the UK or from the UK when they were sunk, right? You may see something that looks like a shell, it possibly is a shell, right? Don't touch it, leave it alone. Photograph it by all means, but don't bang it and poke it just to see if it's real. Munitions, when they've been in the water for a long, long time, tend to become very unstable. So you don't want to risk them going off and being detonated accidentally. So again, look but don't touch, but be aware of the wreck you're diving, and is there a possibility that it has munitions that haven't been used laying around in the wreck or on the wreck. Diver communication, all right? You can use good hand signals if the visibility is clear enough for you to use hand signals. If you're diving a line, you can use line signals to let your buddy know where you are or what your intentions are. They get covered a bit later in the lecture on the next set of slides we do. All right, but good communication is necessary when wreck diving. Right, either use line, you can use a light signal. Right, you all know how to use a light signal. The circular movement to say I'm okay, or the cross movement to say I've got a problem. Right, that will at least alert your buddy, alert you to there's a problem, and you can sort that problem out and make the right decisions as to how you're going to deal with that after you've identified what the problem is. One thing about lights, don't shine the light into somebody's eyes. Dive torches are very powerful, and they do cause people to have temporary blindness. Depth. Dealing with the consequence of any sort of hazard becomes more difficult the deeper you go. So the deeper you go, the more risk there is to you of depth, right? Anything that happens in deep water is it's more it's more dangerous than if it happens in shallow water. You've got further to go to get to the surface to sort the problem out. All right. So when you're diving, make sure you've got adequate gas. Make sure you don't dive outside of your qualification depth. All right. you know, it's quite easy on a multi-leveled wreck for you to get engrossed in what you're doing and forget how much depth you've got. Right now, if you've not planned decompression and you just wander down a little bit deeper than you should be, and you stay a little bit longer than you should, you may pay the penalty of having to do decompression when you get to the 6 meter mark of your dive. Right, and if you haven't got the gas to do that, you're going to have a bit of a problem, and you're going to have to hope that your buddy's got sufficient gas to get you and him that last bit of the way to the surface. So keep an eye on your depth. Make sure you don't go longer than deeper than you should do. Make sure you don't go longer than you should do, and then you're going to be perfectly okay. Resume. Right, this section is the solutions. Right, what we'll do is we'll go some personal risks or risks, and we'll just talk about very briefly what we need to do about those risks. Right, first one is personal risk assessment. Everybody should do a personal risk assessment before they go on a dive. You know, is the dive worth the challenge? Right, all wreck diving or all deeper diving is a challenge. Right, is what I'm going to do worth the challenge? Do I really want to do it? That's all you've got to ask yourself. Equipped, am I equipped for that challenge? Have I got all the equipment I need to do that dive? If I haven't, then I really shouldn't do the dive. If I don't know about a DSMB, or I don't have a spare DSMB, etc., and I need it, you know, to meet any challenges, but I'm not equipped, should I really do that challenge? Psychologically, am I ready psychologically to do this dive? You know, am I in the right frame of mind on that day to do that dive? That's what I've got to think about, right? Equipment provision, always a good one. Equipment provision. Yeah. Personal skills, right? Well, yeah, right. Equipment provision. Have I got the right equipment to do the dive? You know, I'm going to dive a wreck, and I'm going to do line laying, perhaps. So have I got a spare reel for my DSMB, because I can't use my line laying reel and as a DSMB reel, because for any reason I've got to ditch my line laying reel. How am I going to put my DSMB up? You know, have I got the right sort of cutters? Have I got the right sort of torches? You know, have I got all the stuff that I need to make my dive a good, safe dive? Personal skills. Well, you know, have I got the right skills to do the dive? Most ocean divers can do shallow wreck diving, not a problem, right? But, you know, have I done enough dives? Am I confident enough in the water? Is my buoyancy okay? Yeah, these are the things I have to think about. My fitness to dive, you know, am I on the ball for that day? Have I got a cold? Is my ears playing up? Are my sinuses playing up? You know, am I hungover from yesterday and I haven't told nobody? Again, these are considerations. Am I fit enough for the dive? The same sort of questions you'd ask yourself on any dive: shallow, deep, shore, sea, doesn't really matter. Am I fit to dive today? Right. Remember, you're diving on wrecks, and you're diving with silt and obstructions. You know, very important that I reduce the silt that I stir up. You know, it's almost impossible to do a wreck dive without stirring a little bit of silt up. Right? And it doesn't matter how good you are. But the thing is, you don't want to stir up too much. Because if you stir up too much, you're going to ruin the dive for you and your buddy, but you'll also ruin the dive for other people. So buoyancy trim and the way you move around the wreck is very important, right? So be considerate and practice your skills to the utmost degree when you're diving on a wreck. Finning techniques, you know, moving around the wreck without creating silt outs. You know, if you're inside a wreck, and even if you can see the exit on the other side, and all of a sudden you stir everything up in that little bit of compartment, there's no flow through there, so the silt won't clear very quickly, and it doesn't take you long to get disorientated. So again, movement without, you know, be careful how you move about the wreck and don't create silt outs. Streamline your personal kit. We said that earlier on, right? If I don't want to get snagged, don't have anything hanging off me. Do not look like a Christmas tree or a mobile dive shop when you get in the water. For a wreck dive, it's not necessary. You know, stowage of reels and lights, etc. Stow them in the right place. If you've got a pocket, put them in the pocket. If you've got a reel, put it behind you where you can get at it straight away, but it doesn't dangle down and risk getting you snagged, right? So be very, very careful how you present yourself to the wreck when you start that wreck dive. Right, overhead structures or overhanging structures, avoidance, right? And this is not a wreck penetration course. So where possible, don't enter the wreck. If there's no need to enter the wreck, don't enter the wreck, all right? Don't go underneath large structures. You know, we've talked a bit before about how the years that a wreck stays on the bottom, how the metal seems like it's okay, but it starts to weaken. And if there's a lot of weight on a very, very thin plate, at any minute now, that plate can collapse. You know, I've dived an old ferry called the Zenobia in Cyprus. She's been down there since 1983, and all the lorries were chained in the car decks to stop them from moving. Well, she lays on her side, and all those lorries are supported on chains that have been in the water now for since 1983. And of course, the chains are starting to snap, and the lorries are moving from the high part to the low point. Right? That's just one example of what happens over the years. And that would happen with overhead structures that once upon a time were quite rigid, but then all of a sudden they become less rigid and they can collapse at any time. So be very careful when you're going underneath large overhead structures. And always monitor yourself overhead. Right? Always make sure you know what's above you, because you've got to get out of that. If you have a problem, you've got to clear all of those overhead obstructions to give you clear water to go to the surface. All right. Entering an overhead environment. Right. If you do get to enter an overhead environment, then control your breathing. Right. Control your breathing. Because once you start breathing heavy, you'll start using gas, and all movements inside a wreck should be done slowly in a controlled manner. You don't rush at it, right? So know what you're doing, do it nice and slowly. That way you don't disturb anything, and keep your breathing at a nice normal level, right? Before you go into it, can you see an exit, right? Is there a way out? If I can't see a way out and I'm not going to use a line, which I should really use a line, but if I'm not going to use a line and I can see an exit, then as long as I can see it and I can make sure that I can make to that exit, then that's okay. Right? But if I've only got one entry and that entry is going to be the exit, I need to be very, very careful, and I need to think about laying a line so that I can find my way back out of that compartment without any need to panic. Also, look around the compartment that you're going to enter and think to yourself, can I turn around if I need to? You know, is it going to prevent me? Is it that tight? Is it a passageway where once I'm in, I'm in? Right? And then how am I going to get out if anything goes wrong? You know? So I'm in a passageway and it's very confined. I can't turn around. So I've got a choice of either going back, which is going to be difficult, or going forward and I'm not sure of where I'm going. So always think about that. Can I turn around and come back out again? Can I use a line and retrace the line to a known point? So before I go in, I tie off a line, I go in with a line, and I can use that line to take me back out. But that line's no good to me if I can't turn around and reel it in. So can I retrace the line to a known point? And if I've got to back up, right, can I ease my way out of the restriction without kicking up any silt or making matters worse, right? And once I've been in a wreck, right, once I've done this little bit of exploring in an overhead environment, when I come out into an open area, first thing I do is check my gas and check my buddy's gas. All right, have I got enough gas to get me back to the shot line, or I've got to think straight away, I'm going to make an ascent. So if I'm going to make an ascent, the two of us will clear the wreck, and then we will deploy the DSMB as taught in mid-water, and we will make our ascent to the surface. Right? Now the boat will be looking, hopefully, to see if any DSMBs come up, but normally they're just concentrating on the fact there's the shot line, so these boys should get back to the shot line. But there's always a risk that somebody won't, and a DSMB is the only way the boat's going to know where you are. So remember, the DSMB is most important on a wreck dive. Right, entrapment. Well, there's only real way to avoid entrapment, and that is don't get entrapped, right? But if you feel that you have snagged, right, stop. That's the first thing you've got to do, is stop. Because if you are snagged in a net, around a piece of wreckage or whatever, you trying to move can make that snag worse. So stop, think about it before you make the decision of what you're going to do. If your buddy's with you, your buddy's going to help you get out of that snag, right? So allow your buddy to assist you. First of all, don't make the situations worse. That's why you're staying still, right? Is the snag part of your kit? If it's part of your kit, detach it, unsnag it, and reattach it in a more sensible position, right? If it's part of your kit. If it's a trailing octopus from a badly stowed piece of kit, it could be up to 1 metre away and stuck in a crack. Feel around carefully to decide what it is. Find it, feel around at the back of you if that's where you're snagged, and think, okay, what is it that's snagged? So decide what it is that's snagged, if it's part of your kit. If you find out it's a piece of line, if not, is the line taut? So let's say you've caught a piece of line, right? When you feel back there, is that line taut? If not, right, can you make it taut, all right, by hand or moving away? Because if you're going to cut that line, it's better that that line is taut, right? And also, you'll be able to feel it a lot better if it's taut. So you'll know just how far you're snagged, you could say. Right. Is it a piece of net? If you get snagged on a piece of net, that is a little bit more difficult, right? That is a little bit more difficult because nets tend to be quite fine gauge, and they can get all over the place. And that's when really you're going to have to get your buddy to come along and cut you out, all right? Because sometimes you won't be able to get behind to actually do any cutting. So that's when you're going to need to have your buddy with you, right? If it's wreckage, right, you've got to find out how you're trapped. I'm in a bit of wreckage. I've trapped myself in a bit of wreckage. Before I make the decision, how am I going to get out? I've got to find out where I'm trapped and on what it is I'm trapped. So again, we've got to stop, do a bit of thinking, and then make the decision based on whatever knowledge we've been able to get from feeling around from where we are, right? Most importantly, breathe slowly, right? If your buddy's not right alongside you, can you signal your buddy using a light or whatever? If you're using a distance line, can you give him a signal on the distance line? All right, that's about all you can do. Again, feel around to identify the snag, and then decide how you're going to do it. If it's a piece of your kit, unattach it, clear the snag, put it back on somewhere different, and get the hell out of wherever it is you are. If it's a line, tension it and cut it if you possibly can. And if you snagged it in a wreck, on a piece of wreckage, try backing up slowly to get yourself out of the situation. Right. Separation, again, solutions for that. Or you need to regain the line. You know, if you're diving on a line and you've separated for yourself from the line, you need to get back to that line. The difficulty of, if it's a fixed line that's been laid out, and we're not going to go too deeply into this, but if it's a fixed line that's been laid for a purpose, there will be direction indicators on the line to say which way is out and which way is in, right? But we're not going to go too deep because that's more to do with the advanced wreck diving courses. But if you're doing a bit of the line laying, it should be easy to find that line and know which way you need to go. Normally, the way I've always done it is I'll use my left hand if I'm following my buddy out, and when I turn around, I will use my right hand and I will follow that way back. So get an agreement between the two of you of which side of the line you're going to sit yourself on the outward journey, so that when you get to the point you want to turn round, you just put your other hand on there and you go back using your right hand to know that if you keep that on the right hand side, you're going to be going back the way you came. It's getting an idea of knowing exactly where you are on the line. All right. So that's about all we need to do online. Lost Diver. Now, this is a non-penetration course, but the techniques we are learning are also the basis for more advanced courses later. Right? Out can also mean the way to the shot line. That's finding your way on a marked line, right? But Lost Diver, it's potentially life-threatening, okay? It's not a joke, it's a serious matter. And it's more of a serious matter when I'm on a wreck in low vis, right? It's more of a serious matter then, right, okay? So if I lose my buddy, what am I going to do, right? So more serious, check gases, right? Check you are outside the wreck. So check how much gas you've got. Right? Check if you're outside the wreck or inside the wreck. You shouldn't be inside, but if you're outside the wreck, look for bubbles. You're trying to locate your buddy, right? Listen for tapping sounds. He may decide to bang on the hull or the structure somewhere to attract your attention. Right? Listen for tapping sounds. If all else fails, right? If all else fails, get yourself clear of the wreck, put your DSMB up and make for the surface in a controlled manner. Now, if your buddy's done exactly the same, the two of you will come up, maybe not together, but you'll come up on your DSMBs. If your buddy doesn't come up, then you've only lost one diver as opposed to two, right? So exactly the same way as before, have a look around, see if you can locate them. If you can't locate them, abort the dive, come up on a DSMB. There's nothing more to say about Lost Diver. Advanced techniques are taught on other courses, right? But this is not a penetration course. So we're not going to go too deep into penetration. Right, last of the solutions, sharp edges. We have covered this before, right? We have covered it before. Sharp edges are dangerous because they can cut you, they can cut your equipment, they can damage your dry suit. It's all to do with being protected. So if I know I'm going to dive on a wreck which has got lots of corrosion and lots of collapse and plates here and plates there, then I need to protect my hands and put a good pair of gloves. Recommended that if you're diving on a wreck, you have the old Kevlar plates on the palms of the hand, right? You know, saves you having to keep buying gloves, but it also gives you that bit of added protection. Hose protections. Really, the only best way to protect your hose is to make sure it's stowed correctly and not dangling around beneath you or behind you, right? That's about the only protection you can use. You can put wraps on, but wraps aren't going to do very, very much good if you've caught on a very, very sharp piece of wreckage and it severs right through your hoses, right? Remember, if you cut your MP hose, you will lose all the content of your cylinder very, very quickly. Very, very quickly indeed. So be very, very careful. And so sharp edges, to avoid sharp edges, careful movement, lots of observation, and don't touch if you're not sure. Quite easy. Right, we covered the dark part, all right? All wreck divers should carry a primary torch and a backup torch, right? So if perchance you get caught in a overhang that's dark and your primary torch goes out, you've got a secondary torch that you can use to signal and also light your exit from that overhead environment, right? Now, light usage, burn times. All torches have got burn times, whether they be battery or rechargeable, right? Most primary lights have a burn time of 100% for around about 2 to 5 hours, depending on the size of the battery pack, right? Your backup torch should have good batteries in it and have at least an hour or two of capacity. It doesn't have to be a bright light, it just needs to be a good light that will penetrate and you can use for signaling, right? And also use on the surface. Now, there's so many different types of lamp or lights on the market, and we haven't got time to go through every one of them. But there's pencil beams. Pencil beams are the very, very small little lights that you use for poking in crevices to see conger eels before they bite you. You've got floodlights, which people use for videoing, right? And then you've got the high penetration dive lights with narrow beam, which are good for signaling and penetration of silt, right? Your light does not have to be super duper high lumen to be effective. In actual fact, with silt, a good narrow beam of about 1,000 lumens is just as good as one of 3,500 lumens of a wide distribution. Right? It will cut through that silt and allow you to see what you need to see and give you a good idea of direction. Half power, some have got variable power settings. I normally dive with mine on 50%. I very, very seldom use 100% on my torches. And that gives me a long battery life, and it also does for all I want to do in regards to the wreck diving around the coast. Right, that clears this session. Right, so in this session we've done shot line safety, phases of the wreck dive, line laying techniques, and safer wreck diving. Right, on the next session we'll go more into equipment line laying techniques and signalling. Thanks a lot.